You want me to name a country built on drama? Do you even have to fucking ask? I mean, granted, my country started that shit, but it's not our fault. We didn't know they were gonna build a fucking empire of treasure caves. Who's supposed to make sense of that shit? Huh? Not Benedict Arnold. Next time, buddy.
Is there nothing left of the empire?
Enter the American hero, a rugged man of action who works against the system. He's one of many variations on the idealized everyman, from an era where men were men and dogs were men and ducks were men. There are two specifically you guys might recognize who share more in common than you might think. I'm not the first person to note the similarities between the Winter Soldier film and the Metal Gear series, but what's crazy is that I don't think it ends there. Cap and Snake share a lot more in common all over, and I think that honestly says something about where they've sprung from more than anything else. So I thought it would be fun to do a comparison between the two. Just a whole bunch of correlations I think you might enjoy concerning our two favourite men of action. There will be spoilers for both franchises, and in the case of Metal Gear, you're gonna need a lot of background info there, oh lowdy.
Face it, Snake. Once a kid brother, always a kid brother.
Colonel, what's gotten into you?
Lolly-loo-lay-low, lolly-loo-lay-low, lolly-loo-lay-low.
The most obvious similarity comes from the history these guys are steeped in, all of it covering America's involvement in wartime affairs. Cap's the most obvious one, a comic book series created directly as a result of World War II by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby, both sons of Jewish immigrants. He was a frail, impoverished man who felt he could do a great service for his country, enlisting in a military experiment that turned him into a super soldier. Years after the war, he was brought back, Rip Van Winkle style, into the modern day and led the superhero team The Avengers. It became a struggle not against another country, but about upholding ideals, and wondering whether or not he still retained his own sense of identity. Solid Snake, created by the Japanese video game auteur Hideo Kojima, is inspired by the action heroes of 80s western films, mostly Snake Plissken in Escape from New York. He takes more from cinematic inspirations and is something of a second-hand American icon, which offers a unique perspective on the expectations of those characters. His past is very different. He's a clone made for war, and is used by his organization to engage in missions preventing global disaster. That's about as loose as I can put it. Also, unlike Captain America, Snake is a stealth-based operative. He hides in the shadows and doesn't make use of any symbols or costumes to make his points or fight his battles. So far, barely the same. Bad video, oh no. But wait, this is where their parallels start to become interesting. Snake 2 is something of a man out of time. He's the clone of the legendary Big Boss, whose career spanned from the 50s onwards, and who made life difficult for a lot of influential political figures. Snake has all of this on his back, lumbered with a distant past he never asked for. Later in life, a flaw in his genes causes him to age horribly, cementing his position as a complete outsider from his own generation. Snake's age and his interactions with war throughout time are not all that dissimilar from what's thematically happening with Cap at all. A man who was the face of a war and all done in its name. In fact, as the years rolled by, Cap started to become less of a team leader and more of a special ops investigator. The Winter Soldier storyline was the most obvious example, but even before then he'd fallen out of favour with the US and gone under new identities. He's even been seriously aged on multiple occasions. Huh? You see? Okay, yeah, you get it. Oh, and that's another thing. Biology. Both of these men were, at different points in their lives, created for war. This doesn't go away, man, and it's a tragic fact they both have to live with. Oh yeah, and both had the same voice actor at one point. No, seriously, that's a hater.
No kidding. It looks to me like America needs heroes now more than ever. Let's make the world safe for democracy.
Well, I mean, if you're going to choose anybody, Keith Sutherland, am I right? Lol.
I understood that reference.
It's a known fact, proven by scientists, that the best of these heroes always have an air of sensitivity about them. It's really easy to mischaracterize the cliched hero by image alone, but the ones that last are more than just lunk-headed brutes. They're not all fucking Conan.
Prime laps with your 4 wins.
Cap and Snake are two very good examples. I feel like they both know how to do a good chokehold, but also how to pick out a nice pair of drapes, you know? Come on, one of them has long hair, one of them dresses in spandex, who am I to judge? As my northern friend once said, Snake has a PhD in knowledge or something, and he's not wrong.
Class.
When doesn't he have some piece of knowledge to impart, or a rousing speech ready for some shell-shocked rookie?
There's no such thing in the world as absolute reality. Most of what they call real is actually fiction.
I think at any time, any place, people can fall in love with each other.
We all have the freedom to spread the word, even me.
How do you know so much?
I ride dog sleds. I'm a musher.
He doesn't engage in childish games or manipulation, and struggles with the effects of his missions on his personality. There are some varying consistencies in his character, depending on which iteration we're talking about, of course. Big Boss was way more playful and had a deceptive streak, while Snake is more world-weary. He has a distance on his experiences. He strives for a normal life, but his legacy and prowess just make him too valuable to everyone else. Like Cap, he's seen as the best of us, which means he's constantly thrust back onto a pedestal by the others.
Huh? Snake, you're not using a stereo TV?
It can't be. A mono TV. Well, Colonel, there's nothing we can do about it.
I guess you're right. Snake, don't worry about it. There's more to being a good person than just having a stereo television. You can do it just the way you are.
Mono TV.
Cap too shares these qualities. His being brought to a modern era also gives him a more detached outlook on events, even if his feelings on freedom and people are always consistent. He too has no real love for war, thinking he'd be the gun you only have to fire once, and tries to live above the eccentricities of his colleagues with total honesty. It's not to say this makes Cap as much of a downer as Snake. I think he's much less cynical and more of a pragmatic optimist, but he does take the lessons he imparts very seriously too.
It doesn't matter what the newspapers say or the politicians or the whole world. They don't define who you are. You do. And not by your words, but by your actions. The truth will come out. But until then, I'm going to keep fighting. Just like you do.
There's been a lot of variations over the years that totally defy that image, of course, but they only serve to exemplify the original's core traits.
Hands up.
You're proud of that? I think she's dead. Most importantly, they share very similar goals. Save humanity from the encompassing machinations of their ludicrously weird realities. It's so simple. I mean, how can you fuck that up? Oh, and speaking of... Snake and Cap clearly adopt a moral centre, and are very upfront about their overall motives. It's natural, therefore, that their cast would all thematically reflect deception and corruption in all of its forms. Both deal with female spies with hidden agendas. Both deal with mysterious progenitors with eye patches who cause as much chaos as they fix. But even more clearly, both deal with the horror of what the next generation took from their example. Bucky Barnes and Raiden are spookily similar in their roles as cyborg ninjas. Young, morally idealistic soldiers who were transformed into weapons far beyond the power of their mentors. Tragic figures who could have had the potential to live normal lives in a way Cap and Snake never could. Their role as cyborgs in particular talks to how the world is changing, and how it may very well have everything to do with the past. And that's just the conflict within their own ranks. Their enemies are bizarre augmentations of power that don't reflect the human experience in their quest to achieve the same level of respect. They've both fought similar levels of fascists thanks to the nature of their operations, but what's neat is the crossover in form those enemies take. Rogue AI, trained soldiers, they've even both dealt with the supernatural, sorta, specifically vampires, and even a pumped up group of supermodel supremacists. It's scary, I tell you. Two enemies come to mind above the others. Baron Zemo and Liquid Snake, or in some cases Revolver Ocelot. Characters who would probably rather be seen as the heroes that they oppose. It's all a matter of heritage versus individualism. Liquid is complicated for reasons we'll get into, but the principles of his characters at the beginning are clear. He is the other Big Boss clone. L'enfant terrible de... I'm never doing that again. And resents his heritage greatly. Boss started as a heroic figure, but later became a quote-unquote demon through a series of tragedies. Liquid feels this legacy is a curse, and he must overcome the inherent flaws in his birthright. He is of the belief that it is he who has the inferior genes, and he must destroy Snake personally in order to prove his superiority, effectively getting to have his revenge on Big Boss. Of course, this turns out to be the other way around. Zemo too has some major daddy issues. His father was a mad Nazi scientist, but before that he was Baron Zemo, a noble from a long line of German lords and tyrants. This breeding made his grandson Helmut sure that he was inherently superior, but his Nazi heritage forever besmirched that potential. Helmut Zemo at first embraces this when going after Cap, but it's clear that he'd rather have people recognise his innate talents without having to subjugate them. There's an element of this in the Civil War incarnation I really appreciated. A character who, while no monster, was still the head of a kill squad and a man of standards. Only someone like a Zemo would turn a tragedy into an obsession.
There's a bit of green in the blue of your eyes. How nice to find a flaw.
Both then took on brand new identities. Liquid, by way of The Muppet Show, became part of Ocelot, giving both a new lease on life as a central figure in a modern conflict, one as an underdog and one after years of deception as a triple agent. Of course, in theory, it was never really liquid, I know, but there's a sense of his goals being integrated with the somewhat more sympathetic intentions of Ocelot's concerning the boss's legacy. Zemo disguised an entire team of supervillains as superheroes in a new scheme to rule the world, but his fellow villains turned out to prefer being heroes and turned on him. However, it was implied that he got a sick rush out of being a hero, and thus began a new campaign to be taken seriously as a heroic force. Or else. Both these men tried to play the long game when it came to redemption, and were inevitably challenged for their use of deceit. Their ability to manipulate in this way more than anyone else emphasizes the two heroes' ultimate themes of identity and, of course, trust. Tell me, who am I supposed to trust him? Is that who I trust? Cap, it really doesn't matter. Who do I trust? That man is an ant! Do I trust him? As heavy hitters in governmental affairs, both men have experienced corruption within huge patriotic organizations. Conspiracy is their de facto speciality. It's almost impossible to tell a story with them without involving politics. As mentioned, their heritage means they both crossed entire eras together, so storytelling-wise there's already a lot of content that lines up. Fighting against crazy science and shit, it's par for the course. The style of expression, however, that's obviously more disparate. The many people who've shaped Captain America over the years obviously differ from the style Kojima and his crew have offered through Metal Gear Solid. But then we have the Winter Soldier and Civil War films. In adapting the exploits of Cap in the comics, there are too many interesting parallels to what was visually and tonally happening in MGS. We start out on a tanker and the uncovering of a political plot. We have the introduction of a cyborg ninja and talk of changing the rules for the next generation of power play. Giant machines that will turn warfare into something horrific. Rogue AIs feed us information with a liberal use of archival montages. An icy bunker acts as the genesis of their operations. An iconic fight in an elevator. An iconic fight with a helicopter. Hey, this is starting to sound a little familiar, you should probably stop. Cap adopts stealth-inspired gear for their latest outing, a lot of it inspired by advancements in military operations. A secretive allies home team are forced to come clean on their actions. I could go on and on about this, but it seems pretty likely that someone was aware of exactly what they were doing here. So what am I getting at here? Get to the point, man.
Just stop f***ing talking already!
I do believe they must have taken some inspiration when making the films, but I also think that it's interesting to track how inevitable this was culturally. You know, Batman started as a character that was inspired by Sherlock Holmes, Dracula, stuff like that. It goes on and on as its own new thing, occasionally adapting other trends into its makeup. Meanwhile, that same literature inspires a new wave of films and styles of expression in a separate pocket. Years later, when the animated series team and Tim Burton are readapting Batman, what overriding stylistic influence do they look to outside of the comics? No joke, I wrote my dissertation on this, and I just love the idea of someone saying, "Oh hey, I'm doing my paper, what's yours on?" and going, "Batman!" That's probably the case here. By the nature of the material both subjects focus on, American political affairs, we have some natural parallels that have dipped in and out of each other's sightlines. Say you don't believe the Russos have ever heard of Metal Gear. The subject of Cold War tensions houses a complete gene pool of concepts that we know that they looked at, and ones that we also know Kojima, as a history and film buff, very much took inspiration from. It's nigh on impossible for these two franchises to not somehow rub shoulders eventually, perhaps even before we really noticed. Now maybe you feel most of that's inadmissible, and that's perfectly fine, but I still think that they're closely tied whatever happens because of the basic idea that sits at their centre, that sets them apart from even their own forebears. They are men of war. They were created to discuss and untangle moments of great upheaval within America's intangible political culture, one in secret and another in public, and all at the expense of their own well-being. They were complicit in worldwide conflicts, and worst of all know that they share the burden of responsibility to the public to set things right. They are our conscience, they are our teachers, and the only people they cannot help is themselves. They simply move on, helping us the world over. They know that the more things change, the more things stay the same. And war is like a box of chocolates. Ha! Ha! Fuck. Thanks for watching, gang. That was a long one. I highly recommend checking out my boy Charlie's videos on the Metal Gear franchise if you're curious as to some of the issues I have with it. It's really good stuff that he's made. Go watch it, man. I'm gonna fade back into the system, back into the ether. Come join me. Who needs mortality, man? It's great here.
Hello.
Yes, we made it in time. Yes, you weren't kidding. There's enough fucking Doritos and Mountain Dew here to kill a man. Ah, Metal Gear. Yes, no, I've heard that Mr. Mickelson and Guillermo are on his payroll. Fucking piece of shit. But it's okay. We're going to make more Metal Gear. We're going to put them inside of fucking pachinko machines. It'll be amazing. I'm so evil. Yes, this is a perfect plan. Soon the casino will finally be open for business, and we'll make so much fucking money. No one will be able to stop us. Well, I'll let you go now. Yes, you've got to destroy Castlevania next. That's a funny joke. All right, I'll call you back. Drum roll, Mr. President of Konami.